Hello fans of all ages, Ryan Morick back here with you. Hope the snow is treating you well, hope your holiday season is going well. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're probably already pretty confused as to why I am wearing a Mets shirt just about a week after I said on my first video slash podcast that I am a diehard Yankee fan. Like I said, I worked for the Mets for a couple of years. They will always have a special place in my heart. You gotta deal with it. Speaking of the New York Mets, they are making moves. They got James McCann. They already made a couple of moves with Trevor May and that other guy named Trevor whose name is slipping my mind right now. But the New York Mets are indeed making moves, and this is what we expected in the Steve Cohen era. They got a team need. They got a catcher. Wilson Ramos is gone. They really don't have anyone else on that roster or in the minor leagues just yet. They have that guy, Francisco Alvarez, who I will get into later because I think that he's going to play a pretty important part in about 2 or 3 years or so, especially with this contract. But nonetheless, New York Mets get James McCann. A lot of people wanted JT Realmuto. Obviously, he is a better catcher. But when you look at Realmuto, and you look at James McCann, and you look at what they were going to cost, and then you look at the Mets situation where they also need a center fielder, preferably a center fielder who can play defense, which has been a big problem for them over the last few years. They can now afford a guy like George Springer. They can now afford a guy like Trevor Bauer. If you threw this bag to JT Realmuto, you weren't going to get George Springer or Trevor Bauer, because I think JT Realmuto is going to hold out for a big contract, which is pretty scary to give to a catcher in the first place. So, I think JT Realmuto needs to realize that his asking price is probably a little bit too high. But on the flip side, yeah, you're getting a worse catcher in this situation, but you're also getting a guy who, in his last 150 games or so, he needs to stay healthy. He has never played over 120 games in a season, but in his last 150 games, he's had about an OPS of about 800. He's had 25 home runs and has driven in 75 runs. And on top of that, he's a great defender. So you look at this James McCann deal, and you look at the Wilson Ramos deal that the Mets made 2 years ago, which was, again, a move that had to be made at that time. Every Met fan, when I was in sales, they were saying, you better get Wilson Ramos. And they did. So you look at these two deals, I forgot what the deal was for Ramos, but I think it was somewhere around the $10 million a year range. You go a little bit longer with James McCann, and I don't love the 4th year, but I think you had to get that in order to get James McCann, because if you weren't getting James McCann, who were you going to get? There is not another catcher on this market that is good both offensively and defensively. Odds are, if you weren't going to get McCann or JT Realmuto, you were going to get a guy who is going to hit 200, but he can block some baseballs in the dirt. With James McCann, you can get a guy who's going to hit 270, 280. You got a guy who has pop in his bat. You have a guy who you can trust behind the plate. And that's the difference between James McCann and Wilson Ramos. Wilson Ramos was not good defensively. He couldn't throw anyone out. Watching Noah Syndergaard pitch to Wilson Ramos, everybody was stealing. Noah Syndergaard's already slow to the plate, and Wilson Ramos is bad defensively. I felt like every time I was watching a Met game, there were 10 stolen bases against Ramos. But now you got a guy who you can trust offensively and defensively for 4 years at relatively a cheap price. I remember when the Yankees signed Brian McCann, that was a $17 million a year deal. And did Brian McCann do anything special? I don't think he lived up to that contract. The Yankees signed Brian McCann thinking that this guy was going to be a 30, 35 plus home run guy at Yankee Stadium. He never hit anything more than 26. And he was okay defensively. But Brian McCann was surely not worth $17 million a year for 5 years. You look at James McCann, he's absolutely worth 4 for 40. And before 2019, this is why I don't love 4 years for McCann, because he just started to find his niche in the 2019 season. And then the 2020 season, take it for what you will. I take it with a grain of salt just because he only played in about 30 somewhat games out of a 60-game season. And that goes for every single person in 2020, practically. So it wouldn't surprise me if James McCann turns into what he was in the first 5 or 6 years of his career when he was with the Detroit Tigers. If he hits 230, 240, and 15, 16 home runs. But again, you look at the catcher position, and me being a Yankee fan watching Gary Sanchez all the time, you realize how important that framing is and blocking pitches is. Watching Kyle Higashioka against Gary Sanchez was the difference between them defensively is incredible. And I'm not saying Higashioka is this Gold Glove, Yadier Molina type catcher, but Gary Sanchez certainly is not that. Kyle Higashioka is actually a little bit, he's a little bit closer. The Mets made a great deal getting James McCann, 4 years, a little over $40 million. Great plug by the New York Mets. I did say that I wanted to talk about Francisco Alvarez. I think that the best plan that the Mets could possibly have, they have two options here. A, James McCann is what he's worth for 4 years, and then you bring up Francisco Alvarez in September of McCann's fourth year in the contract. And then that's the handoff right there. That's the ideal scenario. A non-ideal scenario, but can still work for the Mets is, and by the way, going back to that first plan, hopefully you find a place for Dominic Smith or Pete Alonso, and you have to assume that the DH is going to be in the National League at this point in time. So you bring up Alvarez, who can catch. You bring James McCann is still going to be on the roster, who can then DH. And hopefully you have positions defensively for Pete Alonso, who's probably just going to stick to first base, and Dominic Smith, who he's not great defensively, but you know that he can play other positions. So the Mets have to hope that Dominic Smith is going to find a position defensively. Pete Alonso is going to be your first baseman, and hopefully James McCann can be a DH in his age 35 season, and Francisco Alvarez is your catcher. That all combines into one ideal scenario. Or, like I said, the non-ideal scenario for the New York Mets is James McCann isn't great defensively in his third year. You bring up Alvarez a little bit early. And again, this has to do with Pete Alonso and Dominic Smith finding spots defensively. And then you have a great offensive lineup for the next couple of years. It looks like the Mets are probably going to extend Michael Conforto. He's your right fielder for a few more years at least. And then, like I said, you can now afford George Springer. Easily you can afford George Springer. Trevor Bauer, I don't think he's going to come to the Mets. I think I'll wind up with the Angels. I just think that they're going to throw him a bag, and it's about time that the Angels get some pitching. The Mets can certainly afford him, and it wouldn't hurt them, obviously. But now the Mets' primary target should be George Springer. And with $10 million a year, you don't have to pay Pete Alonso yet. You don't have to pay Dominic Smith yet. You don't have to pay J.D. Davis yet. You don't have to pay Jeff McNeil yet. You don't have to pay Ahmed Rosario just yet. That's 5 people in their everyday lineup that you don't have to pay right now. They're pre-arbitration. So you can afford George Springer. Who was the last Mets true center fielder? Carlos Beltran? Brandon Nimmo is a corner outfielder. Michael Conforto is a corner outfielder. Juan Lagares was a Gold Glove center fielder, but he had no offensive game. George Springer would be the best center fielder offensively and defensively that the New York Mets would have since Carlos Beltran. I think if the Mets offered 5 for $100 to George Springer, I think that gets it done. And then you take a look at that lineup, and then you figure out what you want to do with Pete Alonso and Dominic Smith, and who's going to play left field, where Jeff McNeil is going to go, what Brandon Nimmo is going to do. But Jared Porter, the new GM, he said that there is a difference between depth and quality depth. Now, a lot of people thought that was a shot at Brody Van Wagenen. Maybe, maybe not. I didn't take it as that. But we all know that Brody Van Wagenen said depth, 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 which ironically he wound up trading away in the minor league system. But I digress. The New York Mets, if they bring in George Springer, they now have a lot of depth. They do. They would probably have 3 guys who could play third base. Jeff McNeil, Ahmed Rosario, Andres Jimenez, J.D. Davis. That's 4 players that you can split between third, short, and second. Pete Alonso and Dominic Smith are your first baseman. Or you could put Dominic Smith out in left with Brandon Nimmo. George Springer is your everyday center fielder. Michael Conforto is your everyday right fielder. J.D. Davis can play left field. Not very well. I think he's a better infielder. I don't think he's very good defensively at all. But again, that's another option for the DH position with the New York Mets. You can give J.D. Davis some days off. I think that's when J.D. Davis was at his best, when he wasn't an everyday player just yet, but he was getting ample at-bats to keep himself in the lineup for more often than not. I mean, that was when he was hitting, 320 at Citi Field in his first year with the Mets. He struggled a little bit last year, but again, you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt because it was a 60-game season. People stopped and started. If you think J.D. Davis is a 270 hitter, no better, no worse, then fine. Like, that wouldn't surprise me at all. And you know, when people say it's a good problem to have, it's a good problem to have, yes, but it still can be a problem. And how can the Mets fix that? The Rockies want to talk with the Mets about Nolan Arenado. Now, you look at Nolan Arenado and you look at his splits, and he is a totally different ball player in Coors Field and on the road. You know who else was a different ball player from Coors Field and on the road? DJ LeMahieu. DJ LeMahieu was a 229 hitter away from Coors Field in 2018. The New York Yankees took him for a 2-year, $12 million deal, and he finished in 4th in the MVP vote in his first year as a Yankee. He finished in 3rd this year. He won the batting title this year. He was in contention for the batting title last year. He already proved himself as one of the better hitters in baseball, and a lot of people said, well, he's a product of Coors Field. And then he proved everyone wrong. He proved everyone wrong by winning a batting title this year. Being a 330 hitter last year, then hitting, 364 this year? So in his 2 years as a New York Yankee, he hit, 350 total? Now, do I think that Nolan Arenado is a 350 hitter? No, I don't think so. But would it surprise me if he came to the New York Mets and was your everyday third baseman? He's one of the best defensive third basemen of all time. That's not a hyperbole. And he gave you 30 and 100 and hit 300? That would have surprised me one bit. His road splits scare you, I get it. But his defense certainly doesn't scare you. And he plays defense at Coors Field. As much as that is a hitter's park, that just means that it's even harder to play defense defense there. The ball jumps off the bat a lot quicker. I'm sure it's much harder to be an outfielder in Coors Field, but Nolan Arenado has won a Gold Glove, what, 8 years in a row? He's won how many Platinum Gloves? He's no joke, one of the best defensive third basemen ever. And if I'm the New York Mets, I seriously consider bringing him in. I know that contract is hefty, but as of right, I mean, he's going to be 30, I think, in April, but you got 7 years left on this deal. You had no problem. I mean, I know that it was totally different ownership and different management, but you brought in Robinson Cano, who's not playing this year. You don't get Robinson Cano back until 2022, where he's going to be, what, 40? You bring in Nolan Arenado, and you don't have to put Jeff McNeil at third base on Monday, and then second base on Tuesday, and then left field on Wednesday, and then back at second on Thursday, and then start him at third in the first inning, and then put him at second in the fifth inning. You bring in Nolan Arenado, you have your guy at third base. Now, the Rockies are going to ask for a lot. They're probably going to ask for Jeff McNeil, who I'm not getting rid of. They're probably going to ask for Pete Alonso and Dominic Smith, and I would not get rid of Dominic Smith. Pete Alonso, in his last 160 games, he's fallen off a little bit. He went crazy in that first half of his rookie year, and his power did not leave in the second half, but he couldn't find holes. He struck out a little bit more in the second half. His power is there, without a doubt, but he's been a 230 hitter more than he's been a 280, 290, 300 hitter. Now, if I'm the Mets, do I trade Pete Alonso? Probably not. I think that potential is crazy. He's a damn good ball player, and I think eventually he's going to get better at first base defensively. He has this crazy work ethic. We all know that. But we know that Pete Alonso wants to be this great baseball player. So Alonso, Smith, McNeil, I'm not getting rid of those three guys. Andres Jimenez, I have to think about it. Ahmed Rosario, I would probably include him. JD Davis, I would probably include him. Brandon Nimmo, I would have to think about including him. One thing if I'm the Mets, though, don't make the same mistake that Brody Van Wagenen made. Try your best to hold on to your starting pitching prospects, whatever you have left. Like this guy, Matt Allen, don't get rid of him. You are going to need him very soon, considering you're probably going to get rid of Steven Matz. Who knows the situation with Noah Syndergaard? And believe it or not, Jacob deGrom only has 3 years left on his contract. Those are going to be a quick 3 years. Who knows the deal with Marcus Stroman after this year? After this year, your rotation for sure is Jacob deGrom and David Peterson. And I don't want Seth Lugo in the starting rotation. He needs to stay in the bullpen. He's probably been your best reliever. I was a big fan of Edwin Diaz last year. I still think he could be very good. He showed it last year. I think 2019 was a bit of a hyperbole. He was still striking out guys at an historic rate. I think Seth Lugo needs to stay in the bullpen. He can't give you 7 strong innings like a deGrom can, like a Stroman can, like a Syndergaard can, sometimes like Peterson can. Seth Lugo can't do that. He's 4 or 5 innings. That's it. If you need a 5-starter, maybe you consider it, but if Seth Lugo is a top 3 pitcher in your rotation, that's an issue. And he's much better in this bullpen. And I think with a better Dellin Betances, like I said, I think Edwin Diaz is going to be better. We got Trevor May. That can be a very good bullpen now. I know that we've said that for 5 years in a row now, and it continues to get worse and worse and worse and worse. But by the names, Dellin Betances, Trevor May, Seth Lugo, Edwin Diaz, it's a good bullpen right there. If that bullpen doesn't blow so many games in 2019, they make the postseason. So if I'm the New York Mets, I consider getting rid of Davis or Jimenez or Nimmo, and maybe even a guy like Brett Beatty, who was your first-round draft pick in 2019. Brett Beatty's an infielder. He probably is going to play third base most of the time. You get rid of him, you get your third baseman anyway. Yeah, Brett Beatty's a great prospect, but that's all he is right now, a prospect who is 19 years old, 20 years old. Nolan Arenado is a proven platinum glover, a proven 30 home run, 100 RBI guy, proven that he can hit 300 throughout the duration of a season. Does he benefit from Coors Field? Absolutely. But I think he could benefit from a rejuvenative, crowded Citi Field if they allow fans this year. So if I'm the Mets, I'm careful about what I give for Nolan Arenado. If I'm Steve Cohen and Sandy Alderson and Jared Porter, I'm not just throwing the bag at them. I'm being selective on who I'm getting rid of. But let's say the package is Brandon Nimmo, Andres Jimenez, and JD Davis. Then you're fine. You got deGrom, McCann, Alonso, McNeil, Rosario, Arenado. Your left field is probably a question mark, but then you have Springer and Conforto. You'll figure out left field. I'm sure there's someone, and I'm just blanking out on them right now, but you'll figure that out. Make a move for a left fielder. You can trade for someone. You bring in Nolan Arenado. You are a World Series contender. Again, be careful with what you get rid of, but if I'm the New York Mets, I easily take a shot at trying to get Nolan Arenado. Exciting time to be a Met fan. Can't wait to see what else they're going to do. Thanks for watching. It is not goodbye. To see you later. So long. Take care, everybody.